to your understanding, who is Mary Magdalene and what was her relationship to the one we call Jesus?
The most responsible answer I can give you is I don't know. And yet, on top of that, I've studied that possibly more than anybody on the planet, which is challenging because the truth of the matter is there's so little we know on the physical level. For me, when you start diving into Magdalene, there's a lot of things that become obvious if you just understand the culture at the time. First of all, most people don't realize that a 35-year-old Jewish man who is unbetrothed, who is not married, would have had zero audience at that time. Nobody would listen to him, ever. The fact that that's not written, that he was solo and single, is a huge red flag. But if you start paying attention, okay, now this woman who gets about town, we can get back to that, for some reason washed Jesus's feet and dried his feet with her hair and then rubbed spikenard into them. That's a really specific ritual called Hieros Gamos. It was big from not just the Inanna temples and Hathor, but also the Isis temple. It was a very common thing that only happens between a husband and a wife. Ever. When you start looking a little bit deeper, he gave special teachings to Mary. We only know parts of them because a lot of it's missing. And people say to me all the time, if I could see any ancient text, what would it be? I'm like, it's the missing pieces of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. That's what I'd love to see. But if you understand first where the word Magdalene comes from, it comes from the Greek word amygdala, which are two almond-shaped glands connected to the reptilian brain. And the amygdala store ecstasy, orgasm, anguish, all these kinds of intense emotions are stored there. These are what are called pinnacle of the temple experiences. What does that mean? Where's the temple? It's right here. You start pulling all that together and you can see that some smarty pants tried to extract her when, if you can just kind of take a few steps back, what really looks obvious is that she was as much a rabbi, teacher to him as he was to her.
Okay. Thank you everybody for being here right now. I am so excited to introduce this amazing guest to the Crystal Tower podcast, where the field is alive and aware. And we are just going to first begin, before anything, wherever you are, if we could take a moment of silence to drop into the field frequencies of our hearts. Let's just take a moment. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, so today we are here with Reverend Dale Allen Hoffman, who I am so excited to be speaking with. Yes! Reverend Dale Allen Hoffman is an ancient Aramaic wisdom keeper. He is a mystic and an energetic healer who has been revealing long suppressed ancient secrets and healing modalities and ancient insight for the present moment. He has published numerous audio and video programs and is the author of the book Echoes of an Ancient Dream, Aramaic Toning on the Path of Light. So welcome, Dale. It is so good to be speaking with you here today on the Crystal Tower podcast.
You almost said aromatic, which means I smell good. People say that a lot. They'll say Dale does aromatic toning. And I'm like, I tone and then I wear like heavy perfume, and I'm just messing, but
Exactly.
it happens a lot.
We got that quantum rose frequency. Yes. And I forgot to mention that I am Hannah Smith. So here we go. So where to begin? Well, first off, Dale and I met about 1.5 months before the hurricane hit North Carolina. We met in North Carolina. And so first and foremost, how are you doing? How is your family? And is there anything you want to share about what that experience was like?
Well, for us, it was very different because we had moved after 21 years in West Asheville. We had moved July 1st out of town, closer, like between Silva and Franklin, and up on a hill overlooking what's called Cowie Mound, which is one of the primary ancient ceremonial centers of the Cherokee Nation. Wildly, like, the hurricane was predicted to go right over top of us, literally to plow over us. And I remember waking up, I think it was a Friday morning, and all of a sudden, I mean, like, literally within 20 seconds, there's all this wind and the trees were starting to literally bend sideways outside. And I went around the house, to my family, our kids, and they had some friends over too that had come up from Florida. And all of a sudden, it just hits, and it was almost like a boom on the house. And I just said, look, we're going to if anything happens, go to the hallway in the middle of the house, all this stuff. And that lasted for about no more than 5 minutes. And then it just stopped. And I look out the window, there's a couple of branches. When I say branches, I mean twigs down. And it was predicted to go right over top of us. But what happened was, when it got to Franklin, North Carolina, it turned directly east and then curled around and went straight at Asheville, right over top of where we used to live, all of our friends and family. And it was wild. Like, people were like asking, well, like, what happened? Nothing. I mean, you would go outside here, and like I said, there were some twigs down. You couldn't tell anything happened. And then all of a sudden, people started commenting on, like, I posted that I was okay, and on Facebook, and people started commenting, like, all of this, like, Noah stuff up on a mountain and all this, like, that we were led here, and oh my God, it's because of what you do. And I'm just like trying to delete all this crap, like, it's the last thing I want while, my friends and family are, drinking brown water and everything else that was going on. We were we were completely untouched at our house here. Like, nothing happened, which is wild because this morning, taking my 13-year-old to school, she's in Bryson City at a charter school, which is 35 minutes each way. I was looking at the Little Tennessee River this morning because it's been raining for days. It's not raining anymore. And I don't think it could take one more inch of water. It would have come over the banks to all the houses along the Little Tennessee here, because now we're in Macon County. But like during Helene, it kind of came up to the banks and went back down. We didn't get hit like Asheville, Swannanoa, Chimney Rock, Lake Lure. Crazy too. We were looking at places north of Asheville to possibly move in Avery County, north of Boone, actually. And they got annihilated. Actually, one of the places that we had looked at, half of it had a landslide and half the property had slid down the mountain. And it was weird because, I mean, that was a place I was like, oh, I don't want to let go of this place. I really love the location, all this. But I mean, so people are like, well, how did all this happen? I'm like, well, I don't, I'm not a heavy goal orient. I mean, I have goals, obviously, but I'm not a person that's addicted to manifestations, so to speak, at least from my perspective. I do what I can to live my life mid-step, meaning that I just take the step, not knowing where my foot's going to land. And if you actually think about that, it sounds very kind of disorienting, which it can be at times. But I just go where I need to go, and we're taken care of. And then looking back, I'm like, what in the world? Like, look, it feels like we dodged a bullet in a sense, but in another way, it's just like, you can't gloat over that because of all the suffering of so many people that I love. And there'd be nothing to gloat about anyway, but, I don't know, all I can say, people are like, how were you led there? It's like, this is just what happened. And now this feels like home. And we're out in the sort of out in the middle of nowhere in a sense. And it's like ultra quiet. Now we have these incredible views of the western sky. And right now, even the sun coming up in the morning, since all the leaves are down. But Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the hurricane, for us, not much happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard kind of what you're saying, that it seemed to have really hit certain pockets really hard, but then other areas it almost was like it never even happened. I had some other friends say that, like, for them, they didn't get touched at all, and they were having a hard time sort of processing the devastation that was happening very nearby to them, but they themselves were sort of isolated from really feeling the impact of the event. And so and I've heard, different people speak about what would create a phenomena like that, where it was so sort of pocketed. But um yeah, it's just sending
Well,
prayers
it,
to
it was
everyone.
weird. Like, it came up through Georgia, essentially, mostly through Georgia, into North Carolina on a path that it didn't really do much on the way up. It was, it was a lot of rain, there was wind, but it didn't really kick into high gear basically until it got just outside of Asheville. And then somehow it blew open. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but and that wouldn't, be explained just by, like, they talked about the perfect storm, and there was a front that had come down and kind of held it in place there, but that wouldn't, as far as I'm aware, that wouldn't account for its intensification of velocity as it sat
Mhm.
there. But maybe it was just, I think really what it was just, it was a lot of rain and it wasn't able to move out, and it just sat there. And Asheville's always been the River Arts District, the Swannanoa River, the French Broad River. Like, everybody, you just kind of drive through there day after day, and you just kind of think, you don't really think about it, actually. You just kind of think, oh, it's so beautiful here. I love how they're redoing the River Arts District. But we had something similar back in 2004, where there was cars floating upside down. Biltmore Village got completely flooded, but it wasn't this bad. So it's like all of that had been rebuilt, and there's sort of this big resurgence, and all of a sudden, yeah, it was really weird. It was just weird. And then there's all this, like, fake news out there of what's really going on, although some of it was actually true. Real weird. And then it all got politicized. Just a bizarre thing that, like, we all felt, even though those of us that weren't in the middle of Asheville anymore got ultra sensitive about. But man, I think the thing that was most amazing was just everybody was out in the streets helping each other. Like, our front yard where we were in West Asheville became a water collection site, where the neighbor two doors down, friends of ours, were taking money out of the brook that ran behind the houses, and was, putting non-potable water out for people to, like, use to dump into their toilets, to flush toilets or something like that. And I was like, man, just looking at the difference between when we were there and then 2 months later, that it's just it. I think it sort of helped, for me, in a sense, foster this sort of multidimensional awareness that I've had for a long time. And but it was like here, it was like in time and space in 3D. It was so surreal that it was just like you're almost watching a movie unfold. It
Mhm.
was very apocalyptic. Asheville, and there's still junk all over the place. They're trying to get it cleaned up, but it's real hard to cut through rhetoric and, like, all of the news that goes out. And what's interesting too is the easiest way to put your own narrative out there and make your own stuff up about, the best way to make fake news is to scream that everything out there is fake news. Then you can say what you want, and a lot of people will just believe you, even if it's completely and totally made up.
Mhm.
And it sucks because the people that suffered were the people that were there, and the people that had
Mhm.
to live through it. There's still people without electric now, a few
Wow.
little pockets, and some without water. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Wow. Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. So, I was looking at your website recently, and I saw a quote that you said. You said, truth is a direct experience. And I could not agree more. I would love to hear from you what that means, what the implication of that is, where we talk about truth and how to know truth. What does that mean to you when you say truth is a direct experience?
It's funny, that's a quote I've been saying for like 30 something years. I think it started in like the mid 90s, but even now, I even have problems with the quote because of the word experience. Because let me put it this way, it's like a lot of the ideas that I bring forth, like a lot of ancient Semitic or Aramaic ideas, I kind of tried my best to bring into modern English. The English language a lot of times doesn't, well, no language is going to translate everything from another language or culture or time, whatever. But the thing about the word truth, man, there's so many directions to go here. So I'm just going to focus. In Aramaic, the word truth is shrara. And, people, I don't, if there's anything that I realized even when I was a kid that made me different than others, is I tended to think deeper. I tended to pay closer attention to a lot of things that other people would smooth over. Little details. And, even as a kid, I would notice how something would happen, and then three or four people would talk about it, and you'd have three or four completely different rundowns of what actually happened, and be like, well, what's the truth? The example I would give today is I've been at so many around, like when there's like an auto accident or something, and the police show up and the insurance adjuster, and they start asking questions, and they ask 10 different people what happened, and they'll get 10 different truths. They'll get 10 different experiences, 10 different views of historically, what just happened 10 minutes, 20 minutes earlier. And if a bunch of those tend to line up and make sense, they all get connected together and they're called the truth. And it's an interesting thing for me. I've noticed that, let me put it, I'm going to kind of go really wide here for a second. When I was in high school, my history teacher couldn't stand me. One of the reasons he couldn't stand me is because I would challenge a lot of the stuff, especially in American history, especially when it spoke of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, the Indian Wars, as they would call them in the Houghton Mifflin books, whatever. And he would, talk about different things that had been happening out on the frontier, quote unquote. And I would just come right out and say, that's not true. That didn't happen. And it definitely didn't happen that way. And he would say, well, you're telling me that a government issued book through Houghton Mifflin that's been pulled together through the Department of Education and when I say Department of Education, don't link me to all the Trump Musk stuff, that everybody's talking about now, but that's been issued, that, this stuff, you're telling me it's made up. And, it was like, well, where did that come from? I had read a book called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee from D. Brown, big, thick book. And I had dug really deep into what really happened during the Indian Wars versus the reality. I was shocked reading that book in my teens, finding out that what was in my history books, especially about the Indian Wars, I always put that in quotes, was largely made up by newspaper reporters who were on the front lines writing sensational stories in the hopes of being picked up on the precursor of the Associated Press, talking about the truths of these, these Crow heathens and these Sioux warriors. And they weren't even called the Sioux, they were called the Lakota. And I started digging deeper into this, and I started looking at American history. And we were told in school, who was it that said, I cannot tell a lie, I cut down the cherry tree? George Washington, right? Did he say it? No, it was made up 100 years later by a biographer. But yet here it is in my history book. My teacher hated me for all these kinds of things. And that started kind of going deeper and deeper, and me looking sideways at the Bible and going deeper into the Christian church than anyone who is considered actually within the Christian church. I can guarantee you, I went deeper and wider, more into the authenticity of that church and or its real history than anybody who is still within it. Without pointing fingers, there's no way to dig into that kind of level of Christianity while still waving its flag. I'm just saying it's not possible. The people that have dug that far, someone like Bart Ehrman, are called atheists. And most of these Christians don't even know what an atheist is. They're thinking agnostic. But so I started going, what is truth? What is truth? All these people parroting back, something from the Bible, whatever translation it is that suits their fancy. And then they call it, quote unquote, the word of God. Not that they have a clue what that word means, even if they're a biblical expert. And I'll challenge any of them. But they call that the word of God. And then they use that, they weaponize it. And, I started going deeper and deeper. And there was a point when I was still in high school, I started experimenting with my breath with, nothing weird, but some people may think it, but like being able to shift energy, to break emotions, things like that. I was reading Subscription to Psychology Today when I was 15 years old. I wasn't normal in that sense. And I started going deeper and deeper into breath work and started having these experiences where, I could throw out quotes from Saint Teresa of Avila or Yogananda, but these experiences that in a sense kind of weren't experiences. It was like for just the slightest microsecond, I was able to see the kingdom, see the eyes of God, whatever you want to call that, the kingdom of God. And on this really deep level, and it was as if I didn't exist. But yet I was in every point of space, but yet space wasn't what was real. What was real was this source, this absolute source. And I can't even call it energy because energy requires movement. So it's even prior to that. And I started having these experiences where I realized when, as an example, Jesus is talking about truth, that Aramaic word shrara, he wasn't talking about, what we would call reality. Like, as an example, what happened. I'll tell you right now, we will never know what really happened in history. All we have is an overall consensus of agreement upon the source materials that we have. But every single thing that we're speaking of, historically, translations, whatever, they're all kind of locked within 3D. They're locked within time and space. And depending on your point of perception, you're going to have a completely different experience of it and a completely different view or perception of what is truth. But I would actually use this quote from one of my mentors. He turned me on to Abraham Maslow, and I realized that wasn't realizing, it was actualizing. In other words, being able to pay attention on such a deep level that I see things as they are without the need to label. In other words, inject thought into the situation. And in a lot of ways, what that will do is allow you to get beyond time and space, 3D, the historicity, the physicality of things. And you start seeing this, you get into the space between the notes, you get into the space between the thoughts. And those little flashes, you realize, to me, if there's anything, after studying thousands of textbooks and all of the curriculum I could get my hands on from every seminary on the planet, and all of the standard issue stuff, and then going completely off menu and studying everything I was told not to. If there's anything I know now after decades, is that I don't have a clue about truth on the physical level. But I know intimately what truth is to me, kind of on the depth of my breath. And I would never, ever feel so arrogant as to think I could express truth in words. in descriptors, on a level of thought, because every thought, there's been this weird aggrandizing of thought over the last 100 years, 150 years, the new thought and all these other things, but you've never had an accurate thought in your life. Your thoughts are literally a delusion of a separate mind that doesn't even exist in the first place. I'll say this, Aurobindo calls the ego a supra-rational enigma, meaning it's not really there, but it's not bad. You start talking about ego death, what's making the proclamation is the ego. Your ego keeps you from walking in front of moving vehicles. It keeps you from jumping off of cliffs. It has a purpose. But when it comes to the subtleties of truth with a capital T, nothing that it's able to throw at you from the intellect would ever be able to scratch even the slightest bit of real intelligence. Is a good way to put it. So long answer.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, what I get from that, and also from my own direct experience, is that, yeah, the field with which one can tap into it completely precedes language. Language is the syntax that is creating the space-time, right? So it's like it comes from a place of the part of the mind that is adhering, it's bound to space-time. And so it's making logic, but actually, like, the direct experience, it's awareness. So it goes beneath and in, and it cannot be localized into a word or even a succession of words to create a sentence. It is the breath of life. And if we can learn to just actually be in the presence of our own presence, then we are actually tapping in closer to something like God or spirit or source or whatever it is that precedes the attempts to even understand. It's like there's nothing to grasp when you're actually in the experience, because the experience, the direct gnosis is so felt, I feel, at like a core remembrance level, that when I've sort of like traveled into deep inquiry, I'm like married to the bliss of like the revelation that is revealing itself in real time. And it's like it just becomes fun. It becomes a fun sort of exploration of intelligence rather than, or like thought, at like capital T thought, like thought itself. And so yeah, truth is interesting, because I hear you when you say that like nothing we've ever said is the truth. And like I understand that. The way that I translate that is, we can't, it's always an approximation. Like if we're using language, it's always an approximation of the isness of what is, of all that is. And yet we're given this mechanism here. And so it's almost like we get to attempt to do our best to try to be the translators for something that almost it's like just a practice of an individual expression of the all that is. And that's what we get. We get to just practice and attempt that. But yeah, we're always just speaking in approximations. And unless we're really entering the field state of resonance with something or with someone that's vibrating at a level that's turning the lights on, that's turning the heart on, I feel like that's when I get closer to a sense of what's real, like what's foundationally real. And if I'm in the analytical mind, I'm like so far from what's actually real. It's like laughable.
Because that's how we met. We met, on an met in this lifetime. I feel like we've known each other for a very long time, and it's like seated across from each other, reading each other's thoughts and
Mhm.
feelings, like right off on a deep level during an exercise, quote unquote, with like ridiculously striking high accuracy in that sense, which is a level that most people don't ever pay attention to. They're always, I don't mean it as a criticism. If someone doesn't show us, we don't realize all that junk on the top of the ocean really has nothing to do with what's further down. And you can realize that, I put a video out a couple weeks ago where I essentially said, you know, are you biting the hook? Are you watching the birdie? Because there's so much to watch the birdie of in the world right now. And it's wild. Like, I can't really get on, like, as an example, Facebook and scroll. It's like, just all it is there's not even a lot of layers of opinion. It's just two opinions that are constantly at war. And then a few people doing something to try to say, are you sure that that's what you really feel? Or are you just picking up other people? And me, I'm just like, I don't want to get into any of it and people tag me and stuff constantly. And then they'll send me a message like, Dale, why didn't you chime in? And I'm like, well, why do you need me to chime in? To reinforce what your opinion is or something? And I tell them, I'm like, I'm not addicted to social media. I don't need it. And it's kind of like, when I started studying religion, I started realizing that there's an addiction, and there's almost like a bullshit runner's high from spouting crap and saying that you're anointed by God and what you're saying is the word of God, which is a funny thing. In Aramaic, in the beginning was the word berashit etoihua milta. Milta, gendered feminine. In the Greek, it's logos, also gendered feminine. What does that mean? Lexis or Lego is an actual written word or a spoken word in Greek. Logos, they'll still say now that it's a written or spoken word, but it's not. It's the difference between seeing a word on a page versus, or I should say, the difference between seeing a word on a page versus the word on the page. We can all see the word on the page. We're all going to have a different perception of it depending on what our view is, whatever that may be. But the word of God isn't what's written on the page. That would be considered a blasphemy in the ancient teachings, because the word of God isn't what's on the page, it's what's seeing it.
Mhm.
There's a great
Mhm.
quote from St. Francis of Assisi I use all the time. I've got several books about St. Francis that one's in, although some people say he never said it. I don't know. But the quote is, what you are looking for is what is looking. So seeing deeply, but then
Mhm.
understanding that, or that in Aramaic, I shied away from saying this, talking about truth, because I knew it would go real wide. But all those I am statements from the Gospel of Yohanan, the Gospel of John in Aramaic, there's not a single one of those where Jesus is talking about himself in Aramaic. He doesn't say, as an example, Ana lachma dahai, I, Jesus, am the bread of life. He doesn't say Ana. He says a word that sounds like this, which is going to sound familiar to anybody in the divine feminine research, Anana. He says,
Mhm.
Anana lachma dahai. And we've got mounds of research that much of what went into the Christian story and even the Hebraic Old Testament story actually came from the ancient divine feminine philosophies and was largely destroyed. It even says in the Old Testament that they destroyed those old gods. Well, guess what? They weren't gods, they were goddesses. And an easy way to just kind of wipe them off is just call them old gods.
Mhm.
And I'll throw a great book out. It's called When God Was a Woman, from Merlin Stone. Merlin, she was an incredible artist, painter, and she started traveling all over the world getting a handle on not just art through the ages, but she started going, what is the deal with all of this? It's like this matriarchy that's everywhere. In other words, much more experiential. Let me say that, my perception of this pencil, would be considered feminine. The actual pencil itself would be considered masculine.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm talking about masculine and feminine, I'm not talking about one thing that's supposed to be better than the other. But the feminine, the masculine's like an arc of electricity. It's like a spark. It's obvious. The feminine is like magnetism. She draws in on herself. She pulls in like the womb. She'll receive anything that's given to her without judgment. Meaning, if you love something or hate it, and that's what you're focusing on in your life, guess what? You're going to get the experience of it. Love or hate, your subconscious doesn't know the difference. But what's really amazing is the feminine may not know the exact words to enunciate, to express how she feels, the exact thoughts and feelings, whatever, as opposed to the masculine, which is all about economy and thought, economy and speech. Write it down, buy it, and sell it to each other. And it's funny, when I started working with Pyradym, which you've experienced, this amazing multi-dimensional vibrational device, my guides and some of the other legions around me, I know, oh God, he had me till he got flaky. Some people would say when I start talking about that, but they basically said, they're like, we've been trying to give these messages to humanity for thousands of years. I'm giving you a direct quote here, but you constantly wrote it down, bought it and sold it to each other, and turned it into fucking religions. I was like, you guys curse? But now we're giving it to you on the level of pure frequency so that you can no longer misinterpret the message. You can turn it up, you can turn it down, or you can turn it off, but the message itself shall remain intact. Well, that message, that essence is there all the time for us. And what we do is we mistake our perception of it that we write down and put into 10 these and 5 those and all these different parameters and steps, not realizing that everything we're writing down in that sense is already coded across our hearts.
Mm.
And the more we, certain languages like Tiwa were in the southwest of the US was never written down because they understood that it would allow a loss of recall. And then the language would no longer continue to evolve. And then we'd start to have relationships with intellectual concepts in the mind and not have an actual real direct experience. And it's really just a matter of take a breath, pay attention.
I love that encoded across the heart. I feel like I've really had to get to know my heart in a way that I've never been catalyzed to, I guess, commune with before. In the last year, I've like really deeply gone into the cavern of what this chamber, this frequency, this communication device is. And it, to me, is where I can feel. I mean, it's interesting because even in the musculature of the actual organ of the heart, I feel is that sort of masculine approximation of what it is actually translating, which is the feminine field of the heart. This is where I have personally found the deepest transmissions of what I would call Christ speaks to and through me. And I'm learning to trust my heart. I'm learning that I can trust in its eyes, the eyes from which my heart sees. And so much of the last year, I've found that it's been like a detox purification process of learning to actually sense what it has always known. And I think that that's what you're saying is there's something encoded across it that is indestructible. It is infallible. It is truth. We can always, through our interpretations, through the way we translate, you know, we may distort it, we may contort it, but we can't destroy it. And Yeah, the deeper I go into this journey, I'm just learning to be with and to like attune myself to the frequency that is already encoded, this like deep truth. And so, um, yeah, I want to bridge also. I see the sun and the moon behind you and the tree, and it makes me feel balance, the unification of the masculine, feminine, and I would love to get into, according to your discoveries within yourself and how you've walked this lifetime, to your understanding, who is Mary Magdalene and what was her relationship to the one we call Jesus?
The most responsible answer I can give you is I don't know. And yet, on top of that, I've studied that possibly more than anybody on the planet, um, which is challenging because you have to learn to read between the lines in a sense without connecting things that aren't connected. Because, I'll be blunt, 95% of what's out there about the real Magdalene, 95% of it is things getting connected that aren't connected, but we don't know are connected, I'll put it that way, but are very alluring and exciting. The truth of the matter is there's so little we know on the physical level that it's hard to say. I will say this, like, for me, when you start diving into Magdalene, there's a lot of things that become obvious if you just understand the culture at the time. First of all, and I'm not, rather than trying to disprove some kind of a negative, most people don't realize that a 35-year-old Jewish man who is unbetrothed, who is not married, would have had zero audience at that time. Nobody would listen to him ever. Nobody would give him any kind of a platform. He would not have disciples. People don't realize that just of the Semitic culture at the time, the fact that that's not written, that he was solo and single, um, is a huge red flag. Other things, and I'm going to pull another Mary in for a second. How does the New Testament open? It opens with a lot of begatting. And when I was a kid, I was just like, man, this is like so boring. And then in like, is it the third chapter of Luke? Maybe it's the second chapter. There's more, there's his begatting, the begatting again, his bloodline, but it's in a different direction and it's completely different people. And it's funny because in Luke, he's not called this, he's called the son of who? Joseph. Adam's called the son of God, not Jesus. But then you just take a couple of steps back again, and it's like, well, if this is a supposed immaculate conception, why are you guys showing us Joseph's bloodline? People don't think about it. They're not paying attention. Well, we have to establish that he's of the bloodline of David. Excuse me, Joseph's bloodline, you're trying to sell me that this is an immaculate conception and God's the father. Joseph's bloodline means nothing. Did you guys not think this through? Did you not go, oh, wait a second here? Oh, yeah, so we can't sell that because we're trying to sell that immaculate conception thing. The only way it's possible would be if Joseph was his father or Joseph's brother was his father. But the fun thing about that, if Joseph's brother was his father, it's still not an immaculate conception. It's right under everybody's nose. And then it's like, okay, he's the son of God, whatever, blah, blah. You put all this magnitude into him. You can take Jesus. It's 99.9% of the story. What's left is everybody else. And then 99.9% of that is the men around him. And then what's left of that is the women. And then Magdalene is just this little side swipe. But if you start paying attention, okay, now this doesn't say that it's Magdalene, but if you start paying attention, and this woman who gets about town, we can get back to that, for some reason washed Jesus's feet and dried his feet with her hair and then rubbed spikenard into them. Of course, while one of the disciples is like, hey, that's expensive oil, you're wasting it. Paraphrasing Jesus, shut up, let her do it. But that's a really specific ritual called Hyros Gamos that came from, it was big from not just the Inanna temples and Hathor, but also the Isis temple. It was a very common thing that only happens between a husband and a wife, ever. You start looking a little bit deeper, and like if you look at the I can't allow the source is not allowed in the Bible, Gospel of Philip, where it says Magdalene, who was called Yeshua's companion, who he used to kiss often on her. I have an idea of what was there. People usually translate it as mouth, which I don't think it was. That being said, I think, why do I not think it was mouth? First of all, it's rubbed out and broken out, just that word. That's something
What do you mean,
somebody
rubbed
didn't
out
want
and
somebody
broken
to
out?
see.
You mean
The
like on the
text,
original of the
on the actual papyrus, it's rubbed to the point where it's gone, and it's so thin. And I'll say this, that's a pretty holy text. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which I can get to, that's a very holy text. It's just little fragments. But it says, called Yeshua's companion, who used to kiss often on her. I'll just say mouth. And then the disciples say to him, why do you love her more than you love us? Interesting. So his response is, when a blind man and one who sees are both together in darkness, they are no different from one another. Yet when the light emerges, the one who sees will see the light, and the one who is blind will remain in darkness. He's essentially looking and saying, because she sees the light and you guys are blind. And it's fun because at the end of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, also not allowed in the Bible, the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary, whatever you want to call it, all the way at the end, he says, well, first of all, Peter says, if you pull in, I'll pull in a line from the Gospel of Thomas, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. Well, that's a big one. That's a big quote. And Yeshua's response in Thomas is, well, let me work with her to make her male to resemble you males so that she can enter the kingdom of heaven. That could be a joke on his part. It doesn't say Jesus was laughing. You can go deep into like Gnostic theory and talk about masculine and feminine and all these other things. But if you look at the end of the Gospel of Mary, Peter again is challenging Mary, calling her essentially a harlot, a streetwalker. And at the end, it gets between Andrew and Levi and comes back. And it says, let us go and preach the gospel. And here's the key, add nothing unto it more than what the Savior said. Which is an interesting thing because you're at the end of this gospel where he gave special teachings to Mary. We only know parts of them. We only know parts because a lot of it's missing, and it gets really intense and incredible and amazing, and then text missing for the next 11 lines. And people say to me all the time, if I could see any ancient text, what would it be? I'm like, it's the missing pieces of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. That's what I'd love to see. But it's like, okay, why did he give her special teachings? Or in the Gospel of Judas, why did he give him special teachings, who was probably his best friend? The betrayal thing is something, we could get into if you want, but yet told them, you don't add anything unto what I said. Again, it's another example of Jesus saying, you guys don't get it. She gets it. She understands it. Who was there when all but one of the disciples took off and ran? Who was the one of the, churchy biblical apostle, the one person other than the apostles that was there? His mom and Mary. Who was it that was the first, to see him walking? Who did he first show up to? Magdalene. And if you start getting into the idea of, like if you go to magdalenefire.com, I've got like this whole set of classes that I have. But if you understand first where the word Magdalene comes from, it comes from the Greek word amygdala. Amygdala is a word for almond. If you follow it out and follow it into the next almond, It's an ichthys, which is the fish that you see on the back of a car. And people go, oh, Jesus fed everybody with 2 fish. They're not understanding that that's a symbology in the Aramaic of the amygdala, which are 2 almond-shaped glands connected to the reptilian brain. And the amygdala store ecstasy, orgasm, anguish, all these kinds of intense emotions are stored there when it feels, and I'll put it this way, these are what are called, in the ancient culture, would have been called pinnacle of the temple experiences. What does that mean? Where's the temple? It's right here. It is experiences when our energy body, haikla is the word in Aramaic, when the energy body basically gets to what I would call an evolutionary moment of truth and almost gets into a state of overwhelm, kind of like blowing into a balloon, the pinnacle of the temple. It's going to expand only so much before it feels like it's about to rupture. And those kinds of experiences are stored in stereo in the amygdala. When you look deeper at the amygdala and you go back into the ancient teachings, including the Hebraic teachings, the Semitic teachings, the Aramaic teachings, this flower of life is all over the place. It's where the Sephirah comes from. It's where the tree of life comes from. The Malkut, all of the levels of the Kabbalah are there. And these people are digging at, the site of, on the Sea of Galilee in Magdala, and they find this box that looks kind of like an ossuary, but it's not. This is about 20 years ago. They call it the Magdala stone. The real one's out or in storage. There's a fake one on display, but it's got this real rudimentary flower of life on top. And if you ask the established biblical scholars, they're like, those are fish. It was a fishing village, and those are just a bunch of fish in a circle. It's like, no, it's a very exact building block of the flower of life, which is kind of one way of explaining 3D reality without going too deep into it. Most research shows that Magdala wasn't even there at the time she would have been alive. There's also tons of research from archaeology, and they're told to hush this, that Nazareth wasn't there at the time Yeshua was supposed to have been born. The word's Natsarit, which means initiate. Interesting. So you start pulling all that together, and there's so much more with Magdalene. I find it very, very curious that you can see that some smarty pants tried to extract her and kind of get her out so we could focus completely on Jesus. When if you can just kind of take a few steps back and look at what we do know about her, what really looks obvious is that she was as much a rabbi, teacher to him as he was to her. And when you start digging even deeper, you realize this stuff that he spoke of, if you go into the idea of the bridal chamber or the chrism or all these different ideas in the Gnostic texts, it only works at 50-50. It doesn't work if it's 75% masculine, 25% feminine. It only works when, and they don't necessarily have to be married per se, but when 2 souls, not necessarily innie and outie, but just feminine in awareness, masculine in awareness, when they come together, and there's a union that goes on such a deep level, and it can even be just a microsecond, but essentially the bridal chamber awakens when you have that direct experience of truth, where you realize that masculine and feminine, like the yin yang, it's not 2 things in relationship, but they're qualities of one singularity or continuum. And the bridal chamber, which is the pinnacle of the temple, opens up when that portal opens, that experience opens, when 2 beings are so wholly, fully present with each other that essentially time and space falls away. And when you start looking on that level and you start reading his teachings, knowing a lot of the side story, the backstory, understanding, that he didn't encounter a devil. It doesn't say that he encountered a devil in the desert. The word in Aramaic is akil kartsa, which is basically like Iktomi the trickster in the Lakota teachings, that he had to get through his own trickster, his own tempter, accuser, resistor, to be able to get to a place where he could come into union and have that experience of heaven on earth. And it was totally, it's totally and completely extracted from the Bible. But the screw ups that they did was they left so much behind. Like, all right, guys, you're talking about an immaculate conception. And I understand that, that Pope Innocent said that, not Pope Innocent, what would Constantine said that, we're going to make this look just like the pagan philosophies of Egypt, because that's what people believe. So we're going to take a lot of the storyline. He said it. It's very, very open on that. But they just left. It was like the people that did it didn't understand what they were doing, and they left basically a train wreck behind that anybody with eyes can see, can realize, oh, look at that, and but with Magdalene, when you really open your heart to her, she really shows up, and she shows up in a way that, for me, that's guided me for decades. And there's stuff I was talking about 20, 25 years ago that nobody could hear. I would do a Magdalene event and two people would show up. One was in the wrong room and the other one was just in there waiting until their actual event next door opened up. So, but now it's almost like you can't beat people away with a stick from a Magdalene event. And, people would say, how do I feel about so much being made up about her? I'm like, kind of the whole story, in a sense, on some level, is made up. And I think that, meaning it was 25, 30 years before any of this was even written down. There was no dictaphones, there's no recorders. But that being said, I think the reason she's coming alive, and even with all of this kind of historical fiction about her, is because she had to go through a resurrection, because we need her now more than ever. And I think it's on the truth level, regardless of how we write the history of it. To me, Magdalene is a state of being, Magdalita, not necessarily just a person. And there's so much more I could say about a practitioner working with participants, and she's getting around town, and maybe they're training or trading money or possessions with her. Because what an Isis priestess would do is get an energy body into what we would call a state of ecstasy, and then allow them to feel whatever emerges, whatever corks come up on the lake, whatever devils show up in the desert, without any kind of judgment, and be able to be wholly, fully loved exactly as they are. And even just a few seconds of that isn't just healing, it's a calibration of the energy body that brings us back to the God state, if people could just understand that. But the greatest way to remove that is to shame sexuality, shame women, the whole thing. And here we are in 2025, and it's happening again. It's happening again, like in a really big way. And I've been trying to remind people, hey, you signed up for this. Don't just, I get it. These are personal affronts to a lot of people, but we're here to navigate this, to help others navigate the cosmic shift, as I call it. The answers are inside. Whatever we need to do is there. Anyway, sorry if I said too much about that, but there's so much I can say about Magdalene. I could go on for 10 hours. But
no, that was so good. And there was a lot that was, I mean, I was right there with you. There's so much that you just offered. And I feel like anyone who is bound to find this podcast is in for a treat, to just be able to really go into all of the seeds that you just sowed right now. I did not know about Magdalene being correspondent with the amygdala. But when you mentioned this, and also the idea that she's been extracted out of the story, immediately made me think of like a lobotomy. It's like It's like,
As
how
soon as you
could
say
we
lobotomy,
ever?
I hear the song Lobotomy from the Ramones, one of my favorite bands, Teenage Lobotomy. But whenever I hear that word, it's there.
Yeah, no, it's just it really is what you're touching upon is this union that cannot be separated. The affect of attempting to separate it is literally a fragmentation. So it's a distortion. Can't actually, like, the truth will always be revealed because the truth is baked into everything that is. And the union of the masculine feminine, these equals that balance each other out, they cannot be separated, just like the yin yang, like you were saying. And so I I have personally felt that I've gone on a deep journey of resurrecting the Magdalene and the Yeshua within myself in an inner union, um, that was catalyzed actually by an outer union. And I think that the sense of twin flame is also something that is coming back into the collective consciousness. And of course, there's many different ways that I think people describe what it is or what it isn't and what their journeys are. I can only speak from my own experience, but this deep catalytic yearning to unionize with the God within. What I found in this is that inner illumination that once you taste it and once you come upon it, it is, like you said, it completely takes you out of time and space because it's like it's eternity in a moment. And it is the calibration of the energy body. And so it is totally healing at the cellular level to be able to have that frequency. I almost feel like there are some, let's say, schools of thought that talk about the dormancy of what we would call junk DNA or whatever, and now the DNA is coming online, and there's lots of different ways we can put language to describe these events. But I think we're at an event of consciousness truly awakening on this planet in a way that we've never experienced before with Homo sapiens, because it's happening now commonplace. I think more and more people are having kundalini, awakening, opening up the stuck, stagnant energy body. And of course, there's different ways in which, depending on the atmosphere and environment that they're in, they might just get treated with a medication and or put in a psych ward or put on antidepressants or whatever, depending on sort of where people are as they're having these awakenings. I think like we're at a moment where we can really steward an incredible mass collective consciousness moment. And I think that you and other beings who are shedding this knowledge and this and speaking from your own gnosis is part of that stewarding. And gosh, yeah, what a wild.
Interesting word there, steward, I'll say too, because the whole, you know, Yee or whatever the hell he calls himself, Kanye West, had, this big thing with his wife at the Grammys or whatever, if you're aware of that, like the outfit she had or didn't have, whatever. And he came out in defense and said that he has dominion over her. And I chuckled and kind of had a tear in my eye at the same time when he said dominion. It showed me, bless his heart, how you know, ignorant his ideas are, because what that word really means is stewardship. What does stewardship mean? It means caretaker. Yeah, you're her caretaker. It doesn't mean dominate. Dominus, coming from the Latin, has, you know, funny, even the way we have the idea of dominate today isn't dominus. Dominus is more of an offering of guidance. Although ultimately the modern English word dominate comes from it. But it's just unfortunate, like the ignorance propagates itself, and grows from that. And it's wild because if you actually study the anthropology of things, we were a matriarchy from the beginning. Always. There's a reason why a woman's voice was higher and traveled further. There's a reason why in some cultures the father wasn't even allowed to be alone with the child until they were at least 5. But there's a lot of all these. There's a great movie that my kids love, The Croods, and it's completely wrong from a perception of what we know about prehistoric cultures. It wasn't all about this masculine domination. That's not the way they lived back then. It was actually very much a matriarchy and stayed that way until only about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago. And then we had this patriarchy come in. And it's not patriarchy that's the problem, it's misogyny. And then worse, even worse than misogyny, is the projection of misandry, which is essentially man hating. So if women try to, or feminine, if a flamboyant gay, male stands up and is just a little too feminine, a little too flamboyant, then the men start getting this kind of threatened mode. And I think that's something that goes back a long way. The reason they feel threatened isn't necessarily that they're going to lose power. It's kind of like a kid being caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The reason they overreact with the parent and flip out is because they know that essentially the one who caught them just saw them in it. And I think the reason misogyny is so intense right now is because it knows it's a death knell. Its day is ending. And what tends to happen is the troops get rallied in the last moments of something. And it's not about, it's not about the masculine going away. It's about us coming back. We're going through this extreme swing toward the masculine. And I really feel that if we can navigate this well enough, we can get that balance back where there can, because I'll be honest, a lot of what we were creating in the last 10 years was a carbon copy of equal rights for everyone. It wasn't really equal rights. If you start looking at it, it was all these labels and labels upon labels. And kind of like when, you mentioned DNA, it's like I kind of look lightly on it because I'm like, DNA is still part of the manifestation. It's not what's absolute. It's not what's eternal. For me, I see DNA as a window of our physical experience, but I'm not interested in the fucking window. Take the fucking window down. Put the window up. I'm interested in, I'm so much for seeing through a lens darkly or whatever. The DNA is the lens. Can we rescript DNA? Yeah, but don't concentrate on DNA. If you come back to what's eternal, come back to source, your DNA will calibrate itself.
Yeah.
This odd kind of weird, like pawing for all of these special techniques and bestsellers and all these other, it's funny because people say, and I'm not saying there's something wrong. I've heard of like a lot of the stuff in the Gene Keys and fucking brilliant. Like a lot of it's great. I've never read them. I'm not knocking that per se, but I'm knocking this idea of, or people to get too far into the sacred geometry or anything and all these different angles and stuff. And it's like, you got to understand, if we can bring our awareness, back to the core, back to the center. How many lights am I holding? I'm holding one. But if we can understand that we have this idea that there's 9 billion people on earth or however many, but the truth is really there's one. Each point of awareness has its own perception, experience, lifetime, whatever. But if we come back to the core of that source, which is who we are, then we'll realize, oh, okay. So peace is not an absence of conflict in Aramaic, the word shlama. Just because there's not bullets flying, although there is still bullets flying in the Middle East, they're just not talking about it. Just because there's not bullet flying doesn't mean there's peace. What does peace mean? Peace is a word in Aramaic and shalom in the Hebrew that essentially means all of the voices of a community are invited to a council fire and they're all invited to speak and they're all fully heard. It doesn't mean an absence of conflict. So even if there's not bullets flying, which is a good step, If there's no actual communication, the chances of calibration, healing, truth are zero. It's not possible. But the thing is, people don't come together because they have still yet not learned how to process their own tempter, accuser, resistor, their own shadow side. They haven't learned how to learn to eat their own shit, is what I say. And until it gets to that point, and then I'm like, look, if these are your supposed God ordained, chosen spiritual leaders, and yet their focus is on murder and mayhem and bombing and obliteration and genocide on any side, I don't care which side you're talking about, or you look into King James and things he did in his lifetime. I'm like, you really, and the lies put out about what the King James Bible is, and people saying, oh, it's so accurate. It's like, how much have you actually studied it? We're allowed to take a few steps back and say, is this the person that I want to stand between me and God, to represent the word of God for me? And it's time for us to start doing that. But we got to get beyond this kind of weirdo. It's really weird, the pack mentality. I've never been a pack mentality person. I've always been the one that went the other way. Maybe that's why I think this way. I don't know. But all this is happening, and it's going to start happening faster and faster and faster. But we really need, right now, more than anything, the feminine, Magdalene, Mother Mary, Anana, all those voices are right here. But in order for us to hear her in whatever manifestation, we have to learn to shut them. Literally.
Yeah, and to receive the blessing that is the non-judgment. That is what you were saying earlier, is the feminine has the capacity to embrace all that is, right? So it's, whether it's the shadow or whatever manifestation the matter is appearing to be, she has the capacity to receive and hold it without judging it and without further splitting it. She gets to just, and I think that's in a way, that's part of this practice of awareness, is learning that we are always perceiving. Like, we're never not perceiving. We're never not, we may not be aware of our awareness, but we're always aware of something. And what we can do is we can learn to steward this awareness, to get to know it, to build a relationship with it. And that illumination, which I believe and feel is like an inner illumination. It's like you were saying about the eye. It's like seeing. It's like what I see, it's seeing into me as well, because the way that I perceive is what I'm going to receive. It's how I'm going to interpret and translate. And I love what you said about the devil in the desert being the trickster. I've absolutely found that to be the case, is that really the illusion of the separateness is, it's the liar and it's the lie. And it can be so slippery and so evasive and so sophisticated, depending on the being and where they are on their journey and on their soul journey. Like, the liar, the trickster, will always be, it's in a way like it will continue to test until one comes to a place within themselves where they're holding so much gnosis, they're able to actually have integrated, if they've ever had that split moment of the non-time space singularity of oneness. If you've ever had that, it's really just like I found my life right now is a series of steps to just integrate what it is that I know, to integrate that love, to integrate that understanding, to integrate the heart, so that even if illusion, lies, distortions, manipulations come up, I'm only getting entangled with it to the degree that I still have not fully integrated the truth, which is the truth cannot it love and truth and peace are my birthright, and I get the opportunity here as a human being to practice choosing it. It's available for all of us. It's available here and now, always, always has been, always will be. But I think maybe part of this process right now of evolving is recognizing we can choose what frequency we want to attune ourselves to and to be tuned up by. And that's a stage shift before we get there, we're usually just running unconscious looping patterns that are sort of just automatic, right? We're just sort of in the default mode, which is not even being aware that we're choosing our our experience, because we're not aware that our perception is something we can actually build a muscle to realize that we are translators and conductors of this magnetism. And but once we find ourselves coming to these realizations or this path, then yeah, is so much of it is about this holy balance. And it makes so much sense that we are yearning for this balance, to integrate this balance, and that the she and the he would come together at this time, and that Mary would come back and be resurrected, just as Yeshua is coming back and being resurrected in the mass collective consciousness, being married with that Hieros Gamos to to I feel that we are bringing heaven on earth. Like we are now, it's in us. This consciousness is us. It's in us. We had the ancestors that walked it, or maybe we're the first ones to anchor that frequency, but it is, I personally believe that the code, it's like pulsing, it's like burgeoning, it's freaking here. It's here because it's the antidote, it's the medicine. And I don't know, I just think I'm just I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'm just excited. I'm excited that things are the way that they are, even if they are chaotic. Like you were saying, there's those death throw moments where the old is having its last hurrah of its delusion. And I think we're kind of there. Like things are ramping up, things are getting faster, things are falling apart faster, because that is what happens in linear time when the light of truth finally shines, and it has shown.
Happens right before what's the most important thing in ecstasy? It's the letting go. We're in this, basically we're in the building of an orgasm, and people are like, no, hold on to it. We got to change it back. We have to change it back to what it was. And I'm just like the one video I put out, learning how to see the grand design in chaos. That word chaos, it doesn't mean willy-nilly happenstance, everything's just happening. Chaos means void. It's an as yet unrecognized order. Like you're looking up at the night sky and you don't see any design. But if you pay attention and you pay attention, you start to see the cycles, you start to see the repetitions, you start to see how everything is all threaded together. And then you're still looking at the same thing, but it's no longer chaos. Now it's cosmos in Koine Greek. And that's the gift of sight. But the only way we can have the gift of sight is so we can learn to take a couple of steps back and just pay attention. This is why I've been saying to a lot of people, like, you're watching the birdie. They're giving you a birdie, and every time they give you a birdie, you get on social media and argue about it. And I see people that should be able to see through this, ministers and, light workers, whatever, either biting the hook of a side or biting the hook of all these birdies and mass media. And it's like, I get it, I understand, but it's like, learn how to just take a step back. If there's anything that's most important in a moment of this kind of literally, evolution, it's letting go. And it's letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that our vision doesn't come, the grand vision isn't going to come from our intellect and things that we learned or study or religion or philosophy or any of it. The real lasting change, the true, like that which is going to reflect heaven on earth, which means we need to get the hell out of the way. It's not going to come from here. It's going to come from here. And it's kind of a characterization, but I mean, it's funny because liba in Aramaic, heart, it's the place where feeling begins to crystallize into what we call thought. But for some reason in modern times, we look at thought as a source, not understanding that thought's not a source of anything. It has no creative power. Thought is the effect of feeling. Feeling is the feminine sensation of pure frequency. Walking into a room and having all senses firing on all cylinders, that's feeling. And I don't mean emotion. That's something else. Multis anima, energy and motion. And we're able to be on the level of feeling with what I call the cosmic question mark until we allow feeling to crystallize and become a thing, a measurable thing that we call thought, which is masculine. But we can be on the level of feeling without having to move to the level of thought, meaning judgment about I like how I feel. I don't like how I feel. It's hot. It's cold. I want more of this. I want less of this. If we can come back to that level of feeling, that's the true womb. That's the seat of power. And let go of having to overthink things, because our thoughts are also informed by what we believe, religion, etc. But then, like you say, there's this capital T thought, which is something that isn't coming from our life experience. It's not coming from, anything that came before it. It's literally almost like an echo from eternity. I love to use the word echo in that sense. And those are what Einstein referred to as the God thoughts. He's like, I want to know the thoughts of God. The rest are details. But we have to get out of the way for that to happen.
I feel like we got into so much beautiful stuff, and I'm wondering if I wanted to hear a little bit more about the sound device, if you don't mind. Just because that was such an interesting, the paradigm. Yes.
God, what do I say? It's like the hardest. I'm like looking past my monitor at,
So maybe I'll start by saying that you and I met at an event where we were paired up together, and we were basically we had like a telepathic exercise where we psychically were intuiting. We would pick an image or something, and then we would tune in with one another and try to guess what that image was that the person had chosen. And we were like, I think we basically like got all of them correct. There was like one in which one of us chose something, then we switched our mind at like the last second, and then anyway, it was very fun and interesting. But during that, you gave a talk, you gave a presentation, and part of this presentation was introducing this something I'd never seen before called Pyradym. And it was, I guess, like a resonant chamber, a resonant instrument of sound vibration.
I'm getting a kick out of whatever you call it, because put simply, it's like a dear friend of mine, a guy named August Worley, was the right-hand man for a guy named Bob Moog, who for the last 10 years of his life, Bob here in Asheville, Bob, they together created something called the Mini Moog Voyager synthesizer. But Bob is, you know, rest in peace, the biggest selling analog synthesizer creator of all time. And so much music from the mid 60s in through the 70s, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, yes, Zeppelin, Stones, everybody was using Moog synthesizers into the 80s and new wave and all of that. But anyway, August just had this idea one day. He had gone to see a family of Tibetan bowl makers at a place, Battery Park Hotel, downtown Asheville, or Haywood Park Hotel. And he just got this idea and goes to Bob with the card or the little flyer from this place, from this event. And he says to Bob, you know, we should make an electronic singing bowl, something we can tune, change the pitch of, maybe have multiple voices. And Bob handed him the card back and said, yes, you should. Meaning I got enough on my desk. Anyway, after Bob passed, August started having these visions. During meditations, he started having automatic writing, and I've seen his journals many times where schematics were starting to form themselves. And he ended up creating this resonance device that is unlike anything else that's out there. It's basically like having three completely independent, although there's no such thing as independent in one unit in a sense, completely analog, meaning no samples, nothing digital, tone devices, and they interact with each other. It's in like a small replica of the Great Pyramid at Giza of Khufu. Even the electronic panels within it are actually in the same spots as known chambers within the Great Pyramid. And in mine, I have it with the obelisk, which is a 15-inch subwoofer, however many thousands of watts. So it looks like a classic Egyptian obelisk. And it's like, I can't explain the otherworldly. That quote I had earlier where I was talking about, we tried to give you this for thousands of years and you constantly turned it in religions. That was a response from my guides to me about Pyradym and why Pyradym was so important. And what you do is you sit with it, and essentially, like what August says, it goes where it needs to go. And it's really powerful. There's three independent tones that when you start working them within each other, like as an example, what do I have within my, I don't know if I have my striker, but here's this. I'm going to use my laser. This is just two. It's called a duo chime from Woodstock. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's the third voice. These are two that are very close to being in perfect harmony, or should I say unison, but they're just enough out from each other to create that third voice. And what happens with Pyradym is you get, you know, just with the two lower tones, you have that bass frequency, and then you have another tone and you start working them against each other like, whoa. If I start moving them away from each other, it'll be like, whoa, 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 whoa. But what's really amazing and deep insight in it, when they get as close as they possibly can, that sine wave, that third voice gets wide as it possibly can. But then it'll have these moments of silence where the two waves cancel each other out. And then you have like sort of, you're going to hear the third voice, and then there's this long point of silence, which always makes me think of in the Gospel of Thomas. Yeshua says, if they say, where did you come from? Say, we came from the light. We came from the place where the light became manifest, which means obvious in our image. And if you say to them, what's the sign of the living one within you? Say it is movement and rest. or movement and repose. Repose in Aramaic and Hebrew would be essentially Shabbat. People think of Sabbath as like not doing things, but it's not necessarily, it's just one little piece of it. It really means kind of the space between the notes, the silence between the thoughts. But when you start learning how to work with Pyradym, and just learning to feel on a deep level, like August says, it goes where it needs to go. And I can't explain what it's like to have Pyradym, and the way, like when I breathe more deeply, and my senses are hyper aware. And when I walk into a room, I can notice everything. If an outlet has just like the slightest little, most people don't notice things like that, I hear it. Can't hear my kids when they're calling for something or they want money, but I can hear that. But it's just funny how it affects me on a level in so many ways that my thoughts can't touch. That being said, yeah, we're actually, what is this, February? So at the last weekend in April, we're doing our second annual Pyradym Summit in Lake Lore and Chimney Rock, which were basically destroyed in the hurricane. But right near there, we did it last year, where it's a whole weekend of Pyradym and sound healing and incredible music and a lot of Aramaic toning. And we come together from all over the world, and it's really cheap too. Spend the weekend just getting into a place where we not only learn how to use Pyradym, but just being with it. And I'm really excited. I didn't know if we were going to have it because of the hurricane, but it looks like we are. Anyway,
beautiful.
I barely scratched the surface of trying to understand or explain it. If someone goes on my YouTube channel, you can find videos on there where you can actually hear it, but it's nothing like being in the room with it. Because when you're in the room,
especially with your subwoofer,
you can have the best sound system and subwoofers, and you're still only getting like an example of what was recorded of it, which is very different from being in the room with it, because that subwoofer it sits on, the obelisk, has portholes and it literally breathes. Like when I'm working with that, I can feel the on my feet, and we've tried recording that, shove an SM57 in there or whatever, and it's still not like being in the room with it, because there's this multi-dimensional experience that you can't touch, with words.
Yeah. And it's different. I mean, it's similar to a synthesizer, but it's different. The way that I think part of at least my understanding of experiencing it is that it's being infused by an intelligence that's running on a current of it's not just an electronic musical instrument. It's creating frequencies, and it's choosing passages for these frequencies to go in that just are really it's like you can commune with its choices and what's emerging from it, which is like with your subwoofers. I mean, it was creating such a place to really be entranced, go into trance with it and allow the frequencies to work through the body and the system. And it's interesting, like what I'm hearing you say is that it's making you sensitive. It's allowing for your awareness, for your perception of things to be open, so you can like hear the zapping of like a outlet or something like that. So I mean, sound healing and everything is that is part of also this like collective consciousness awakening thing. Is that's very big now, as people are recognizing how important and integral vibratory sound is, and why it's so important that we are becoming more conscious about what it is we're choosing to listen to. Not just music, but even the programs that people watch, right? It's like you're getting the frequencies of the spirit, of the animating force of that being, that's translating, the all that is in their own unique individualized expression, but they're getting to call and to tune into whatever it is they want to be a mouthpiece for. And we just think we're watching TV, but actually we are receiving the frequencies of vibration, of sound, of words, of energy. And so, yeah, if we can realize how sensitive we are and how much that falls into the programming of how we end up perceiving things, then we can choose more consciously what it is we are feeding ourselves, feeding our awareness with. And if we are even going deeper than that and working with conscious sound tools to recalibrate the systems in our bodies, yeah, I think this is a huge paradigm modality that we will get to be able to really start healing our fragmentation, healing different illnesses, putting things back into an order of harmonics. Like when you were playing that ding, you can hear the different like undulations and oscillations. And so much of healing is allowing, like you said, getting out of the way so that the universe can be the self-healing, self-organizing universe that it is through us. We know how to do it. It was designed to get it done. It was designed to organize, to heal itself. We're not designed to be in dis-ease. We are designed to be in harmony and balance. And we can more deliberately do this by choosing the modalities, choosing the atmospheres, the environments that are resonating harmony, aka well-being and health, in which the getting out of the wayness is really just allowing for what we have identified with to subside for a moment in time so we can actually be available for the direct goodness that is baked in to existence itself. And just to receive again, the beautiful feminine, receive the healing, the miracle, our birthright. It's our abundance. It's here. And I feel wants to come now is what that has led me to when I have allowed my different constructs, different trickster energies to subside and just to receive. There is sometimes a wellspring of grief that is right there. And in a way, sort of like you were saying about the orgasm of the ecstasy, which I freaking love. It's like we're reaching peak climax, but it's almost painful and it's like uncomfortable and scary. And people are like, no, don't go there. It's kind of because if we are really to feel the ecstasy, sometimes we go through portals of grief. We go through the recalibration of the stuck density.
Whatever's seeking to be spoken, regardless of what it is, our most important thing is just get out of the way and not judge and just let it happen.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Dale, well, thank you so much. I feel this is maybe a good place to subside our own interaction. Is there anything that you would like to share before?
Well, just one little piece. When you mentioned like the inherent goodness of things kind of encoding itself in Aramaic, it's interesting. A better word for it, people will say, and it was good, like from like in the Garden of Eden. It's not exactly what the word means. There's not really, even though people in Hebrew and Aramaic today will use the word good, it doesn't really mean good. Toba, it means right.
Yes.
It means fertile for this present moment. And here's a fun part. If it's like a stone green banana or a black, oily, oozing banana, that wouldn't be considered ripe. It's underripe or overripe. The word for that in Aramaic is bisha, which was translated as evil, which just means it's not quite ripe, it's not quite fertile, or it's past the point. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
when's the only moment in time you can judge fruit as being ripe is right now. In this present moment, you sink your teeth into that nectarine and that nectar starts running down your chin. It's a very present moment experience of fertility. And when we realize that, that's why I'm always talking about going back to source, going back to the absolute. There's nothing we can add onto the everything that's going to make it more than what it is or better than what it is. We're always trying to kind of reinvent the wheel. If we could learn to let go and allow ourselves to come back to that cosmic source, whatever evolution and opening and awakening, we would realize we've missed lots of basically orgasms in our life because we're not paying attention. You know, what is the key when Carlos Santana hits a note and he bends it up and is he thinking, did I pay the gas bill? Did I leave the lights on before I left home? No. The key is he is open. What's the key in childbirth? Let go. Let go. But it's not like this artificial detachment where we turn our back and don't deal with anything. It's a matter of wholly, fully, truly letting go and being able to, learn to see with the eyes of God, which I know is a charged statement, but
Well,
and
what other
most of
eyes
that's
are
here.
there?
Most of it's heard rather than seen. What's that?
I said, what other eyes are there? I mean, I think that part of what the letting go is letting go of the separation. The idea that somehow God is in through and the all in all, and yet somehow this is not God. Somehow this is not God.
For me, it's like I kind of maybe like 20 years ago, I started going, all right, if God is, as they say, in everything, every point present, omnipresent, omnisentient, omni-awareness, whatever, what's that really saying? We're saying it's all God, but we need to learn how to see clearly rather than to inject all of our concepts and all of our beliefs, our BS, our belief systems on top. And if we could just learn that, that's the real key. Is again, it's, what you're looking for is what is looking, rather than the idea of something's missing and I need to fill the hole. Realize that if something's missing, you're not seeing clearly enough. Not really.
Right. And then we get back to the illusions, we get back to the liar, essentially, that we're learning to shed these ancient, you know, lies and entanglements and knots that we've been in. And I believe that there are a million different pathways to every human being's journey to finding that kingdom within, to finding that truth, that inner illumination. And I think that, yeah, for as many eyes as there are on planet Earth, there's that many paths, there's that many chances and opportunities that God has laid out before us to be able to always return to what it is we need to metabolize or be metabolized by, to have that communion, to have that gnosis, to have that experience. And so, yeah, I'm always just in a journey of recognizing, you know, where there's judgment still living somewhere, whether towards myself or you know, out there towards something else, and learning to just continually pivot. And one last thing is we've been talking about truth, but I think a big part of truth is trust. Part of this journey for me has been, what do I trust in? Because so many people, it's existential. We don't know how to let go because it's threatening a sense of existential security. That's why we want the logical certainty of concepts, because we think that it makes us safe and secure, but it severs us. And so it's coming back into, what do we foundationally believe in? What are we putting our belief into? Because if we're putting our beliefs into something that we don't foundationally trust, has our back, then we're never going to let go. And so it's coming down to, I think, what do I, as a unique individual expression, truly believe in, so that when I let go, I can trust what it is I'm letting go into. And again, it may be a concept at first, right? It may be a sort of, uh, a bit of a projection at first, or attributing characteristics to a God that will make me feel safe and secure. But actually, through enough, I've been in situations in my life that really brought me to my knees. They were like, being in the trenches sort of moments of being very existentially threatened in a way. And it's these moments that have shook my system that I had to find what I could trust in. And what I realized was there was still programs running in my operating system where I didn't trust myself. And that's why it felt like I was in danger. Because at some deep level, I knew God was within me, but I didn't trust myself. I was afraid of myself. There was too much stuff that had not totally been integrated. And so now I'm finding that I thankfully made the choices at a very deep foundational level to not jump ship, to not abandon this curriculum here in this incarnation, and to just shed and purge and purify and unhook and watch the identity have its delusional chaoses, and also midwife it back using and being infused by the Divine Mother, being infused by Mary, being infused by Yeshua, being infused by all that I could ever put my faith into, and let it wash me so that I can actually let go and let this animal body unclench without being afraid I'm going to shit myself. And even if I do, I'll be okay. And that this is part of being an infant, learning that we are being held. Yeah, it's a groovy time.
The
groovy
word
time
for
to be
trust in Aramaic, you'll recognize it from English. It's hymen. Hymen is the word for trust in Aramaic. It's the root of amen, from this rooted earth center. It's the root of belief. It's the root of faith, haimanuta. But hymen is, the Essenes talked about this idea. It's a word, razo sounds kind of odd, but it shows up at the end of the Beatitudes. It shows up in a couple different places in the Beatitudes. But like in one of the last Beatitudes, it's this idea of almost being, I was talking about that sort of pinnacle, the temple, but almost being resonated by an experience to the point when one is about to cease to exist. And it's the warazo is this idea of a membrane that the Essenes talked about, of learning to allow one's ego, one's individualized self, to become so pliable and so cosmic, so wide, that it's as if the tips of our fingers touch the tips of our toes across the echoes of eternity. And only then, when you are at your absolute most trusting, position in the galaxy, can you become a resonant membrane for the cosmic vibration. And I think it's a perfect representation of how the church didn't have a clue what they were doing with the Jesus teachings. In the Dark Ages, even all the way up to King James, they were bringing women into the church, pulling their dress up and spreading their legs and seeing if the hymen was compromised. not understanding that Yeshua wasn't speaking anything about what was physical and masculine. His teachings were 100% feminine, and didn't understand that the idea of a virgin has nothing to do with physicality. That word betalta in Aramaic virgin, it just means pure. It means pure. And the purity, all that matters coming back to the ripeness, it just means pure now in this moment. And people hate it when I say it on radio shows, but I'm like, someone can kill somebody and then walk out the door and heal someone. And I'm not condoning the murder, but what I'm saying is it's all about now. And that was totally and completely removed for the Jesus teachings. The fact that spirit, what does that mean in Latin? Breath. What's the word in Aramaic? Ruha. All that was removed. The feminine nature was removed. But without sounding too graphic, it's like we took the sensuality and the sexuality and shamed and guilted it away to wipe it off the table, when the absolute, the Magdalene manuscript, Tom Kenyon, Judy Sion, it's like Magdalene speaking, and that is, the greatest path, the most effective, efficient path to God realization is through our natural inherent sexuality and sensuality. It's there for a purpose, being able to, like I say, not trying to be too graphic, but allow the R and the legs of the cosmos to be open and comfortable and trusting to such a point that we can finally come back to this cosmic union that Jesus was trying to teach us about in the first place, and that was totally shamed and removed. So
Yes, yes. I've had my own experiences with my relation with my sexuality, where I've come to find this. It was this awareness of. It's funny because the words that came to me was immaculate, and it was also it not virginal, but there was a sense that I had restored my consciousness to recognizing my innocence, and it had nothing to do with naivete. It was like, oh, I'm not naive, but I'm tapping into something that's so pure and beautiful that it's inherently innocent, even in it, but not in the way that we feel like innocent means that you are childlike. It's more just a freshness of like recognizing that there's just like an emanation of beauty that can flow through. And I was having that experience through my own sexuality, right? But like you're saying, there's many different ways, I believe, in which beings, no matter what we have done, we can. Nothing destroys our relationship with our source. And if we are able to have a moment of recognizing who we are, we can refresh the frames the frames of who we think we are, that makes it virginal in a sense. Not okay, I actually don't like that word. But I think, like you were saying about someone can kill somebody and then heal somebody, I think that's possible because there is, and it doesn't mean that that being wouldn't, they would likely go through a process that we would call sort of redemption, but not redemption in our eyes, judging that person. Redemption that that being would be going through within their own eyes on themselves and the eyes of God, right? And getting to you're not just deleting things from the file cabinet of.
it's kind of allowing the compass to come to true north. It's a bit of a
Yes,
calibration,
yes,
you
yes.
know.
Yes, and to be able to actually hold that, to sustain that, to walk with it and to embody it, um, that's usually not an overnight thing.
Oh God, no.
I
People are like, yeah, the people will say to me like, how long did it take you to not have to remind yourself to breathe when something happens? I'm like, you want the truth? At least 20 years. Now it's like if I'm watching a movie and all of a sudden there's blood flying, I'm just, or if something happens in real life or somebody pulls out on me on the road. But that's after decades of reminding myself, you know.
yeah.
Men tend to
Yeah.
make big things out of stuff, like the Big Bang is kaboom and bang in all directions. But you know, it's funny, like Alan Watts, he was like, it's probably just a wiggle or a giggle. Or to me, it's like the vision is more like, I don't even think of the masculine explosion. The reason I think they can't find it scientifically is because it wasn't that kind of thing. It was more like the yoni of the cosmos just had the slightest quiver, and there was just enough trust to birth the
Mm.
world. And if we look at it on
Ooh.
that kind of a level and not remove the feminine, but allow them to be in the 50-50 balance, we'll start realizing what heaven on earth really means outside of all the BS, the belief systems.
And it already is in the 50-50. And perceiving it as not is part of the liar. It's part of the
Yes.
trick, right? Like
It's all of
it
this, it's all the
is.
stuff on top of the ocean that we're just not looking deeply enough. We're still looking at the window, whether it be DNA or beliefs or religion or psychology or philosophy or whatever. Just lift the window. It's
And may we rest in
actually, you
the
don't even lift it.
breeze.
If you just let go, it goes away, honestly.
Yeah. So this is maybe begin to feel it, to know it, and to be known by it. With that, this has been a really beautiful conversation with you, Reverend Dale Allen Hoffman. Thank you so much for being here. Where can people find your work if they're interested to learn more?
I'm easy to find. Just write Dale Aramaic in Google, or just daleallenhoffman.com. If you just Google my name, um, everything comes up. So all
Okay,
the social
wonderful.
media and all the you know, whatever stuff that people say pro and con, you'll see it all. So
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your presence with us today. Looking forward to speaking with you again.
I'm honored.
And for those of you that are interested in working with me or learning more about me, you can go to integratedflame.com. I look forward to hearing from you there. This has been the Crystal Tower, and see you next time. Thank you, everybody.